Thanks. Hey, everybody. My name is Tim Smith. I'm the Senior Product Manager on the Chef Infra product. Today, we're going to be talking about making DevSecOps an automated reality. And this is our agenda. Once I get my keyboard in the right place. We're going to talk a little bit about current DevSecOps challenges. We're going to give a bit of an intro to what we call policy as code and why we think that's a really great solution to some of these challenges. John Snell is going to give a bit of a demo where we show you some of this functionality, show you how you can test not just infrastructure, but compliance and security as well. And then we're going to take some questions. So with that, we'll start off with a bit of reasoning for why this matters, right? Top performers are really using security and compliance to speed up their business. People who aren't utilizing that are actually having their business slow down. So it's kind of a question really of whether you want to be slowed down by regulatory and security requirements that we're all facing now in the enterprise, or whether you want to use that to your advantage against your competition. There's a really great study that comes out every year, the State of DevOps 2021 edition. This is a research project that Google puts together with an awesome team of researchers. And they poll a whole bunch of organizations about how they're performing, take questions about what their challenges are and what their processes look like. And from that, they're showing that people are teams who integrate security practices throughout their development process are 1.6 times more likely to meet or exceed their organizational goals. And that's really what we're going to be talking about here today, is how we can get those security and compliance processes as part of our process. So we don't make it a thing at the end of our development process that really slows us down. We did a great research together with IDG. They have a fantastic amount, again, of customer data all across the world, different businesses. Everybody in the Fortune 1000 is, talking to IDG and giving them information on what they're doing and what their business looks like. And that showed that DevSecOps adopters are 3 times more likely to say integrating security speeds up their software delivery, while non-adopters are 2 times more likely to say it slows them down. So again, we want to be on the side there that's getting that advantage, not the side that's getting slowed down by this. And that's all about where we do it in our process, how we bring it in, how we utilize security to our advantage, not our disadvantage. The reality at the moment is, unfortunately, we're in a really siloed world. We have teams on the compliance side, we have teams on the security side, and we have DevOps teams. We used to have 4 silos here, but thankfully we went through the process of recognizing that Dev and Ops can work together, and we get some great harmony from that, some great advantages. We want to do that same thing here, because what happens is the Dev and the Ops teams work together. They get some code ready, they get the configuration changes they want, they get it all ready to deploy in production, but it gets stopped because it has security or compliance changes that have to happen, or it just needs a rubber stamp from those teams. These are manual processes. These are things like change review boards, Jira tickets are moving around, and that really slows our business down, right? That means now we have code that was ready to go. We have value we could take to business. We have something that could be increasing our revenue, but we can't push it out to production because we wait till the very end of the process to bring compliance and security in, instead of bringing that in at the front of our process, which is what we really want. So we want to tear these silos down. We want to get some of that great advantage we got with DevOps, and we want to do that with DevSecOps. And that's all about making this a world where we can collaborate together. We're going to bring those compliance, security, and DevOps teams together in a single pipeline. And that means that they're all collaborating as the process happens, not at the end of the process. And they're all going to do that in Chef. Obviously, that's what we're here to talk about. And that's going to let us get changes to production quickly. It's going to take some of that friction out, some of the animosity between these teams. It really, again, the same advantages we got with DevOps movements. We're doing that in the DevSecOps movement. That's the whole goal of this movement. And we want to talk about, making that a reality, making it more than just a buzzword. This is our policy-based DevSecOps automation architecture. If you're familiar with Chef Infra, this is pretty similar to how a Chef Infra promotion works, how things flow through Chef Infra. And that's really the point, right? We're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. We're trying to make sure we bring our security and our compliance teams into a process that we already know works, process that you already have. So you don't have some big massive change that you have to take on. This isn't bringing a whole new product in. This isn't blowing up all your CI pipelines. This is bringing security and compliance into the thing you already have for your infrastructure. Starts on the left, where we're going to be creating and testing policy. We are using the word policy here. This is policy as code. What is policy? Policy could be infrastructure changes, chef recipes, chef resources, OHI plugins, things like that. It could also be compliance and security changes, whether it's an InSpec profile for CIS or some custom security profile that you've written. We're going to test that all locally. We're going to make sure that works on our system, iterate on it, develop it until it fully passes and everything looks great. And then we're going to promote that up through a CI pipeline. From there, we're going to enforce that policy. Enforcing the policy happens by pushing this new policy onto the Chef server, promoting it into a new environment, and then pulling it down into all of our systems. So that could be an edge device, that could be an employee's laptop, that could be a server in the cloud, on-prem, whatever. Anywhere you can manage a system with Chef, we're going to be pulling that content down. We're going to be enforcing that configuration, whether, installing Nginx, configuring something like postfix, whatever it might be. We're also going to be ensuring the compliance and the security of that system. So we're going to then execute that security policy, that compliance policy. We're going to push all that state up, the state of how that infrastructure change happened, the state of that security and compliance. We'll push that up into Automate, where we're going to continuously report on that and trigger different workflows. We don't want to hold your data hostage, obviously, so we're going to make sure that's available to you. That's not only a place you can log in and kind of see the status of all your systems, but also trigger webhooks, use the APIs to get the data out, or trigger things like ServiceNow workflows. So this is our workflow. Like I said, it is very similar to the Chef Infra workflow. If you were just doing infrastructure changes, it would look pretty much the same as this, minus talking about policy. This is really about bringing that security and compliance into the existing workflow that we have. And there's some great advantages to doing this way, to building on infrastructure as code, a thing we already know works. First of all, we're getting collaboration. We're getting all these teams together, working on code bases, working on a single code base and a single tool. And that has, a fantastic advantage of bringing these teams together and making them actually talk to each other. That also scales really well. These teams are not sitting in the same room, especially not with COVID, not sitting in the same room. People are at home, people are in different time zones, people are in different countries or continents, and we can work all together through PRs in a way that is almost like we're all sitting in the same room. It also gives us a great ability to shift left, and this is really the key here. This is a lot about what Google was talking about and the state of DevOps. We want to make sure that we bring security into the process as soon as we possibly can. And by allowing users to test that policy directly on their workstations before it ever even goes into a CI pipeline, before it goes to a dev or a staging environment, certainly before it goes to production, we can make sure these systems are secure as we develop them. If we apply a CIS profile as we're going and building out infrastructure, we can make sure that we have to do the tweaks to make sure it passes those regulatory requirements on our laptop, which is a fantastic place to do it. It's the cheapest place to do it. And it's the place that makes it so our business can run the fastest. From that, we get continuous visibility, right? We can see this on our laptop. We can see what our compliance state is going to be. We can see in our CI pipelines what our compliance state is. We can see in dev and staging environments, and we can see in production. And we can see that continuously because we're going to be continuously scanning our compliance every time Chef Infra client runs. We think we have some great advantages over other solutions with that. The first one is probably the best in my mind, is that we're talking about an integrated solution here. We're not talking about bringing another tool that we bolt on where we have different teams working in different things. Everyone's working in the same code base and in a really integrated solution, which gives us that ability to really practice DevSecOps. If we bolt another solution on, we kind of lose that collaboration. We still somewhat have silos. We have processes through tools, and maybe we can accelerate ourselves through tools, but we don't have that true collaboration we get when we have a truly integrated solution. We have testing at our core. Like I talked about, we're going to be testing these changes on our local workstation. That's super important. Chef at its core has always believed that testing is the way that you make changes quickly in production. We're bringing those same practices into the security world, using tools like Test Kitchen to make sure that we're continuously testing everything, not just our infrastructure changes, but our security and compliance changes. We have a great set of content as well. This is a really important one. We don't want you to have to just go and write all your own security rules. You can certainly do that. The engine allows you to do that, which is a fantastic feature. but we want to give you a lot of content out of the box. If you have regulatory requirements like CIS or DISA STIG needs, you can just apply a whole bunch of content we have for that to those systems and really see where you stand in terms of your compliance without having to go and write any content yourself. And then lastly, we have that reporting and data portability layer. You're getting that data continuously reported up and automate. You're seeing visibility on where you stand, not just from the infrastructure compliant or the infrastructure convergence standpoint, but also that compliance and security standpoint. But you're also, being able to push that data in other places, whether you kick a webhook off, whether you alert into Slack, or whether you push off, a complex workflow outside of automate. Those things are all possible because we're not keeping your data hostage. We want to make sure you can integrate with other systems. So what does that integrated solution mean? I kind of got a little bit ahead of myself here. That is our secure agent-based infrastructure automation solution. We're bringing that into the compliance world. We have that powerful automation language on both of these. We have an automation language for the Infra side and also for the InSpec side. A whole bunch of information gathering and built-in resources. We have 170 Infra resources as well as 500. It's actually more than that. I think it might be closer to 600 now since we made this slide. InSpec resources. So that makes it so that when you do want to write any of that custom content, all the tools are there for you, which is a fantastic thing. Both these languages, build on kind of a common idea. We have a cookbook with a recipe. Inside of recipes, we have resources. This is a fairly simple language to work with. It's extendable. It's a Ruby-based language. You can definitely dive into the Ruby if you want to really do complex, wild things. But you don't have to because we have, like I said, 170 built-in resources. On the InSpec side, really similar story there. Your profiles have controls, and those have tests. Inside of those, you're executing our resources that are all built in. You can kind of bundle these together the same way you would bundle a cookbook with recipes. And again, it is Ruby based, but you don't have to use Ruby if you don't need to. There's 500 plus built-in resources. If you want to use all the built-in resources, you can have at it. If you want to write your own custom resource for doing some wild infrastructure compliance thing, you totally could. It is available to you. The advantage we get here, is that we're combining these things all into a single experience. And I think that's the key for our integrated experience. We have the traditional infrastructure phase of how the Chef Infra client runs, and now we're also running a compliance phase as well. So that means every time Chef runs, if there's compliance content defined, if there's compliance content in the cookbook, it'll go through and it'll execute that as well. Really similar to kind of the existing workflow for infrastructure, but two distinct phases now, all under the same agent. So there isn't a need to deploy multiple agents. I know a lot of security tools, you have another agent on the system that's continuously running. We have one single agent running on a timer, nothing running in the background ever. So really great for resource utilization as well on these systems. And we think, this gives you really the best of both worlds. You get this policy as code advantage, the ease of use of having a shared language with InSpec. You use this for testing your systems. You use this for testing your security and compliance. You have no new clients that you have to deploy. You have the existing Chef Infra client. And that gives you a really simple path to production, that same path you already used. No new CI pipelines or anything like that to be deploying. On the power side, you can utilize immutable content delivery with policy files now to push out your compliance content as well. We'll talk a little bit about that. And this works with all the existing tooling you have. So all the existing CI pipeline setup you have, now you can bring compliance and security into those pipelines, and you can really have that whole integrated solution with a pretty minimal lift here. This started with Chef Infra Client 17.0. We released this back in April. This is the first release of Chef that has the compliance phase. This lets you execute InSpec compliance content at the end of your Chef Infra run. This is an extension of the legacy audit cookbook for anybody who's on the audit cookbook, fully backwards compatible with the audit cookbook attributes, allows you a nice path into compliance, into DevSecOps using that kind of legacy workflow. In Chef Infra Client 17.5, which came out, I want to say maybe in like July or August, we shipped the idea of having a single artifact compliance phase. And this is a really big change for us. And this really makes that that single pipeline DevSecOps story or reality. This lets you ship that compliance and security content directly in your cookbook. That means that you can package it all together, you can work on it together, you collaborate on the infrastructure content, you collaborate on the compliance content, all in the same repository. This gets tested as one unit, and best of all, it gets promoted as one unit. So a single change that brings in all the security concerns, all the compliance concerns, as well as the infrastructure concerns. And I think, again, I just spoke ahead of myself, but that's really about, kind of shifting that security concern. Now we're testing this on our laptop. We're testing that artifact that includes some InSpec profile, as well as our security, or sorry, our traditional infra changes. You can see that on the right here. We're loading in this My Important Cookbook temp profile, and we're bringing in some InSpec input files as well as waiver files. We're running those right out of the cookbook, right out of a versioned artifact that we already have with that cookbook. And this really gives us some great new security practices, things like code reviews, CI pipelines, version artifact promotion. These are things we haven't had in the security world before. So it's fantastic to bring these in. And we can do that all with policy files, which is a fantastic way to kind of securely and safely promote these changes we have. We wrap our cookbook that includes our infrastructure changes, as well as our compliance changes. We wrap that in a policy file. We test that on a local system. We know that works. And the best part is, by wrapping it in that policy file, we've created an immutable object. So when we test it on our workstation, that same immutable object is going to be the one that we push out to staging systems. It's going to be the same one we push out to production systems. Really similar to kind of a Docker container promotion. And that means that if someone changes one of the dependencies, or somebody goes and uploads new profiles or anything like that, we're not going to change that artifact. That artifact will be the same artifact that continues to run until we promote a new one. And that gives us that confidence to know that, hey, working systems are going to stay working. It doesn't matter what else happens in our environment. We won't change the way we do compliance scans. We won't change the way we build our infrastructure out. Like I said, we really think that testing at its core is an important concept for DevSecOps. We have fantastic tooling already for the infrastructure side with Test Kitchen, with Cookstyle. We're bringing these same tools into the security and compliance world. We have our first security Cookstyle cop. We have InSpec cops as well now there to look over your compliance code. And we have the ability with Test Kitchen to converge not just the infrastructure side, but also that compliance and security side. So this can all happen, again, on your local workstation, in a CI system that runs in the cloud, or in a data center or whatever. Really, fantastic way to do that. And that's all happening with one language, which is great. This is a language we've already been using with Test Kitchen. We've already had InSpec tests there to check on our system. If we're installing Nginx and building out a web server, we're going to use InSpec already to make sure that Nginx is running. I can curl to the website and get back certain content. Now we're using those same resources that we already had, the same language, to write security tests, to write compliance tests. And that means we have operations staff that can help security staff. We have security staff that can help operations staff, because they're all communicating in that same language. They're just using it for different things, but it's all those same 500 resources that they can utilize no matter what their business need is. And then finally, content. Like I said, we don't expect you to go and write all of your security and your compliance posture out. That's great. If you want to extend it, you want to, provide additional security content that you want to execute with Chef Infra. But we're going to give you a whole bunch of content out of the box. CIS and DISA STIG content is available for you as premium content with a subscription. We also have a ton of great community created profiles that are out there as well. And you can write your own custom profiles. And then you can write infrastructure tests. So there's kind of a layered approach here that it grows with you. You can start out with just applying CIS profiles, and as you get more confident with the tool and your needs grow, you can move into additional ways and eventually end up with really robust custom security content as well. But you don't have to do that from day one, which is fantastic. In terms of the content we have, here's a giant wall of text. I think there's probably a few more that we missed in here. We have a ton of content. When we went to update this, we realized that there was like twice as many as there were in the previous slide. We're writing all kinds of content. We have a pretty large team that's going through and continuously updating the CIS content, making sure we add the latest operating systems as CIS pushes out those new profile versions, making sure we put the updates out. You see that we're kind of moving pretty heavily into the app side as well. We've delivered recently a lot of database content, so you can make sure you have a CIS compliant operating system, but also, making sure that things like Postgres or Cassandra are also compliant. And you can even take that up to, Nginx or VMware ESXi, which is pretty cool. Compliant everywhere. We have all that content for you. And it's a little more than just content. There's kind of a life cycle to this content and to the process we think is pretty important. It starts on the right here with acquire. You're getting this content directly from Chef. You're not buying this content from another person. There's a secure chain of custody. That content is in Automate. It's tested in Automate. It's secured in Automate. It's securely copied down to each client based on what you define, right? So you're going through and defining what you want your baseline to be. You might want CIS. You might want some DISA STIG content. Up to you. And you can set waivers on that because we know that out of the box, CIS content is pretty strict. It has rules like can't have a web server running. Well, that might not be appropriate when you're trying to secure a web server. So you can write waivers, again, directly in those cookbooks, define those waivers, and you can also apply remediation content as well. Then we're going to go through and actually execute this. We're going to detect all those issues, apply the waivers for things that we don't want to scan. We're going to apply remediation content. If you've opted into that, that's going to go through and actually secure any issues we find. And then we're going to report that, right? And then we start it all over again. We're going to do this every 30 minutes. You're going to have that continuous compliance. And as new content comes out, as new versions of CIS content comes out, and you get those in Automate available to you, you can define those new versions and you can kind of continuously keep those systems more and more secure. So this is kind of, the heart of this process. I hope you got an idea of kind of how you can extend not just your infrastructure, but also into security and compliance with some of the tools that we provided recently with Chef Infra Client 17. I'm going to hand it off to John now for a bit of a demo.
Thanks, Tim. Hello, everybody. Just going to share my screen. Let's see. Okay. So everything that Tim was talking about at a high level, and not so high, he gets down into some good detail. I think that's easy to consume. What I'm going to show is some really hands-on examples of what Tim just talked about. And the environment I'm in the screen that I'm sharing right now, I have Chef Workstation installed on a Linux workstation. And this is a free download, so you can go to the chef.io website to get started. I also have my workstation configured to connect to an Automate, Chef Infra server. So the activities on my workstation, content that I'm creating and generating can be pushed up to that server and then distributed to all my nodes. So in this example, I'm picking up on Tim's Nginx mentions. A fairly straightforward thing to deploy is Nginx, but there are some configurations that are required and some other aspects that you want to make sure from both a compliance and a security standpoint. So this is the simple metadata. And just before I dig into some of this code, to reiterate Tim's point, I have a Chef repo on my workstation, and in that I have my cookbooks, and within the cookbooks is this Nginx folder, which has all my code for this particular task. And within that, there are directories for my compliance. If I was using attributes, things like that, those are also encapsulated. That's important to highlight because what I'm about to show is the interaction that between those components that Chef makes very easy and automatic. The basic recipes I have one recipe that's called default, which is this. And you notice that it has include profile in it, include waiver, and include recipe. The recipe itself, which I'll show in a minute, is the Infra side of the equation. And the waiver and profile are the compliance portion. I don't need to put these in different places within my code base. They're all encapsulated. And when I do that and use some of the commands that I'll show you in a second, Chef is bundling them all together, keeping them all together, makes it very easy to align. So this is the actual recipe, which I'm installing Nginx. I'm installing curl also because I'm doing a test later that requires curl for this example. I'm creating some certs here, and I'm using some of the 170 Infra resources that are built in to create a certificate, do some different things here, set up my and copy of my templates for my Nginx server itself, sort of the high level conf file that's common to any Nginx installation, a profile for this exact site, and an index for that, which is a template. And I have those templates also in my same cookbook directory. This template actually uses a little bit of code to pull some dynamic content when it's posted. So I can use this on any number of servers and get node specific information back from a test website. The other piece of this is the profile itself. And I have used my profile directory right within my cookbook. And I have two controls in this control, sort of split them out into sort of the configuration profile bits and the security profile bits. And this is pretty straightforward. This is, since I'm running it on port 443 with some secure stuff going on, I'm disabling. I want to make sure port 80 is off and disabled, and 443 is listening. The package is installed, and I'm just doing a little curl here, basically a describe resource that allows me to check the content of that website and make sure it matches something. A little more critical for the security piece is to ensure that I have a good version, current version of TLS. And this has 1.1, 1.2 I could also do, which is a standard. And that'll be all done in one fell swoop as part of this process. Now, Tim mentioned waivers as well, and I could create waivers and implement them to say, okay, there are particular controls. This one I want to run, this one I don't want to run, and you can add justification. Again, adding code that can be shared across all your teams, no matter where they are. So if they have a question like, why did we turn this one off? Oh, I see, I remember why. These are also dated as well. They have expiration dates, which makes it easy to set particular timeouts for something that was waived. Perhaps a team is going to make a fix later, and that would be documented right here in a waiver for that shared information. So all those pieces in place, the first step that I would do, and actually let me show you, because we're doing test-driven development, I have a kitchen.yaml file in here, and kitchen is this file basically drives the test kitchen process. This enables me as a developer to test my code before I push it anywhere, before I share it anywhere. I would, of course, run cook style on all my documents that I've showed so far to make sure there's no coding mistakes. But this will actually spin up real versions of my code in defined systems that match my infrastructure that I want. In this case, I'm using the plugin that allows me to do this right in AWS. I've added my credentials through the AWS CLI previously, so I only have to provide minimal and basically publicly viewable. There's no credentials showing in my code, which is a good thing. But what this will do is actually spin up test machines in AWS, apply my recipes, test it with the profile that I defined. And then when it's done, it'll tear it down for me. Obviously, in a workflow where you want to enter something into CI/CD, that's a very powerful process because you can run test kitchen in those things to actually, if it fails, don't promote. If it does succeed, promote it. So actually, in here in this directory, this is the same directory, just in the shell. I'm just going to run kitchen test. And I'm going to let this run. And what it'll do, and we'll revisit it, it's actually going out to AWS and spinning up the machines that I want to happen. So while it's doing that, let me just jump back to my code view here to mention the policy file. In the policy file flow, instead of, if I had other dependencies, and for this particular cookbook, I don't, Nginx isn't relying on any other packages or any other cookbooks to make itself work. But if I had those, an older way of using Chef would require you to sort of bring all those things together. Policy files instead take a look at the recipes that you have, looks at the metadata file, looks at your profiles, bundles them all together, and allows me to push them to my Infra server in one go. That's particularly valuable for a couple of reasons. One, you don't have to muck around with different pieces and make sure all those various cookbooks are in place. This policy file process takes care of all that for you. And perhaps even more importantly, it creates an immutable object so that if somebody tries to change something on one of your target nodes, regardless of what environment it's in, it won't change unless you really want it to by doing this process. So back over here, where my policy file is, I can just do a chef install, and it knows to pick up my policy file. And it created a lock file as part of this process, which is this file here, which is just a JSON file. And I can do a chef push. In this case, I'm going to do prod and policy file.lock.json. Oops. What this is doing in one quick step is it just did everything that I just described and uploaded it, including the version that's identified in my metadata file. And now it made it available to be applied to any system that I wanted to. In this case, I have a Ubuntu demo node that I'm using. So if I do a knife node show demo, you can see that I've applied this Nginx policy to it, and it's in my production. I have some other information here about it. I can easily set other instances to use this profile, or I can actually bring in multiple profiles into multiple cookbooks, other things that I want, maybe a Linux baseline plus Nginx, and I call that policy file my baseline web server, for example. And those can all be bundled together. I can run this since it's been applied. I can run it in a couple different ways. Command line version, and let's just show you this in a second. So I have that profile and I have my machine. So I'm going to do an InSpec exec and the path to my actual profile directory, and the target, which is my little Ubuntu node. And I've set it up just to connect with root. So what this is going to do is just take the profile itself and run it. Oops. I have to do it like this. It's logging in, it's checking to make sure. This node, since I've applied the my cookbook to it in the profile, is in place. It's applied everything to configure the node, and InSpec is doing everything that I've defined to show that everything is as I wanted it to be. Back over in our test kitchen, you can see something very similar. This is the final step of that, and you can see after the infrastructure portion of what it's doing, it moved on to do the compliance portion, which is exactly the same. And then when it was done, it shut it down and destroyed it. Obviously, in most cases, you wouldn't do these things simultaneously. You'd wait for this to be all green before deploying something to production or test or dev environment. Just to show you, to close the loop a little bit in Chef Automate, and this is the view in compliance and the profiles. These are some of the larger benchmark CIS and STIG profiles. And unlike my simple profile that had 2 controls, any of these, and I'll look for something under Red Hat perhaps. Here's a benchmark for 7 server. If I click on it, see that this is 189 controls, and these aren't pulled out of the air. They're actually built on the CIS and in other cases STIG standards. Each one of these is setting a particular requirement in the control with a lot of other information, description. And you can add tags to these as well for tracking. So when you're working in teams that have a lot of different needs and want to look at different stuff, you can track this and make it searchable that way. In my actual local version that I just used, you can see here's the cookbook that's up here. I have my policy files are here, and these are a couple baselines. I have the Nginx profile, which includes the run list, which is, hey, run the Nginx cookbook, and that brings everything together. Now within Automate, I can also see obviously that, hey, everything is compliant, everything is good to go. I know that my nodes are in good shape. I do have one node that I had a power failure and went offline. That's why you have that little dip there. It doesn't know about it or hasn't heard back from it. That's what this little gray is. But in each one of these cases, here's that Ubuntu demo node that's being tracked. I know that it's got the run list, which is my Nginx default. And I can see over time. Obviously, Automate is the way to use this policy as code profile at scale so that you can really not just do one-offs on a single machine or single VM or cloud instance, but to really pull all those things together and assign the capabilities, test those capabilities throughout the process. With that, I'll turn it back to Tim.
All right. Hey, everybody. So with that, we can take some questions if anybody has them. Giant thank you to John for showing off what we've got with the demo. And hopefully people have some good questions about compliance phase and DevSecOps in general and what we can do with Chef. I think Heather's going to handle the questions.
Sure. Great. Hi, everyone. You didn't do the wrap-up slide. I got off.
Oh, the wrap-up slide.
That's okay.
Yeah, I should have done that. Wow.
No worries.
Too late now.
We did have a couple questions regarding compliance phase. Is that a new feature? How do you go about trying or getting that?
Yeah, it's a feature that shipped in 17.0, the first version of compliance phase. That's really about kind of bringing the legacy audit cookbook into Chef. So all those same attributes you would use with the audit cookbook, kind of a lot of the same functionality, but bringing it directly built into the client, making it work with better logging and better error handling and all those things, but doing it in a way where you can just apply those same attributes you used before. And then in 17.5, we released the ability to ship those profiles like John was talking about right in the cookbook. So that's a fairly new feature, shipped, both of those shipped in the last 12 months.
And I'll just add that capability dramatically brings together all these components, excuse me, in a way that's simple and repeatable, and really plugs in nicely to CI/CD workflows and those kinds of things that you're doing. Dramatically simplifies what you're doing on the command line, and simplifying what you're doing in your code itself.
Great. I'll throw out a question that I have. It's
Sure.
the new year. 2022. What are you working on that you're excited about for the coming year?
Yeah, we got really kind of a two-pronged emphasis right now. The first one is providing more security functionality within the Infra client. So we're going to bring more resources to do more security hardening right into the client. Like I said, we had 170 resources. We'd like to have 175 or 180 or 190. Every resource we can give you is something that you don't have to write yourself. You don't have to write a recipe or your own resource. So looking at things like managing SE Linux, managing different firewall systems, managing screensavers on Windows, which is an important one for people who have physical data centers. You want to make sure that when the screensaver goes on, the system asks for a password afterwards, so somebody doesn't just crash cart when your servers. So we want to provide all those resources. The second part is something we've traditionally called target mode. I think we're tentatively looking for a better name. I'll leave that up to Heather on the marketing side, but giving target mode the ability to configure REST devices over REST APIs. So that would allow you to use your Chef client from a centralized system to reach out to different devices like network devices, storage devices, security appliances, and go and configure those. Just like they're a real system, they would show up as a real node in Automate on the Chef server. You'd be able to find them in search. You'd have OHI data gathering. So you'd have full inventory of what your operating systems on each of your storage servers were. And then you'd be able to write recipes that would configure them. So we're pretty excited about that. You'll see probably a preview of that with Chef Infra Client 18. And that'll be something that will kind of continue the theme throughout the year of us making sure you can really use the Infra client to secure systems.
I think it's important too to highlight, oh, sorry, Heather, but
go ahead, John.
Everything that we showed today is working with Chef Workstation, which replaced Chef DK. If you're still using Chef DK, please upgrade to Workstation. Not just to give yourself that exercise, but Workstation has so many new features, including everything you saw with this integration. It's really critical to that piece, and it's a free download, and it works very similarly. And as you could see in both Tim's examples and mine, Chef's created a great plugin for VS Code. If you're getting started, content auto completion capability is really handy, and it makes for a great complement to Workstation.
Yeah, and that Workstation code base is getting better every month. We're going to have a release this month that is going to include native packages for Apple's M1 architecture. So that is a pretty huge performance improvement. I'm running that on my laptop right now, and it is quite snappy, not having to emulate the Intel code. And also we're having a new Test Kitchen plugin for VMware vRealize automation version 8. So if you have VRA in your environment, and VRA 8 specifically, which is a big ask from a lot of people, we have a new plugin now that they just released this morning. So that'll be in Workstation as well. You'll be able to use that out of the box without having to install anything. So
it's great.
Awesome. I think I just see one last question. What's the best way? I have some Infra users already. What would be the best way to kind of start looking at InSpec and compliance phase and those new capabilities?
Yeah, I think we have some pretty good Learn Chef material on the InSpec side. In terms of the compliance phase, the compliance phase non-integrated cookbook version is documented up on our Chef docs site at docs.chef.io. You can search for compliance phase there, and that gives you information on how you'd set the attributes and how you basically apply some of that CIS content. We're going to have a lot more content there as well, since compliance phase is becoming a more and more important part of the product.
And there are a couple different ways to start using InSpec if you have Workstation, to pull content directly from Supermarket or from GitHub. So you don't even have to download these InSpec profiles. We've thought about those things and made it built right in so you can test against running systems. It's also system agnostic. So if you have something that's manually configured or configured with another automation tool, InSpec is happy to work with those things, and there's nothing that you have to install on your targets for InSpec to work.
Yep.